Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 26 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Toronto Maple Leafs, in which the Sharks have lost 3-1. This is 1 day removed from a San Jose Sharks shutout victory against the Montreal Canadiens, and this game actually played out relatively similar to that one. Now, you may be wondering how that's possible to go from a 4-0 win to a 3-1 loss and have those games be similar, but it's a situation in which I do think the Sharks were outplayed here tonight, not by a large margin, which was definitely nice to see, but I would say they were outplayed. But the Sharks had a few very, very good chances to score goals, and unlike in the previous game against the Canadiens, where they capitalized on those chances that they had, here tonight they missed on many of them. Timo Meier had a great chance that Samsonov made a save on. There were like 3 different breakaways in the first period from Gregor, from Radim Shemek out of nowhere, from Luke Cunnin. So the Sharks definitely had opportunities to score more than just their single goal this game, but they couldn't manage to do so. And on the other hand, they were doing a pretty decent job at shutting things down offensively for the Leafs. The problem is that the skill difference between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens is decently wide. I mean, the Leafs have Tavares, Matthews, Marner, Nylander. All of these players are so skilled. So at a point, it's very difficult to continuously shut those guys down for a full 60-minute games. And so they managed to get their chances here or there. And while the Sharks didn't give them much, only Matthews actually managed to score a goal besides Marner's empty netter later on. But still, you could see that there were a bit more cracks, which allowed the Leafs to actually get these couple of goals. There were a bit more cracks in the Sharks' game here tonight compared to last night against Montreal. But starting off with the first period, it would actually end up scoreless. Like I mentioned, while the Sharks did have those 3 breakaways in the first period, primarily this period was played inside of the Sharks' own zone. The Maple Leafs got some very good chances for themselves, but Aaron Dell was surprisingly very effective here tonight, and so it was a 0-0 game after 20 minutes. In the second period, the Leafs would strike first from Matthews, but the Sharks would pretty quickly respond with a Matt Nieto goal, and that would be still a tie game after 40 minutes. And this third period would go on and on and on with no goals being scored either way, and it seemed as though we were destined to head to overtime here tonight, but that doesn't end up being the case. In the last just couple of minutes, it is Engvall, a pretty unlikely suspect here on the Leafs, who manages to get what would end up being the game-winning goal for Toronto. The Sharks would pull the goaltender. They'd have like a chance, but most of the time the Leafs were just doing a very good job at keeping the puck out of the zone, had like a couple of opportunities to score on the empty net before they actually ended up doing so with Marner here, and the Sharks would end up losing the game. So like I said, a relatively similar one to the previous game, though a bit more exciting because of the opponent that the Sharks were facing against. It's just that the Sharks, they didn't really get that same opportunistic goal scoring as they had yesterday. On to the players to talk about leading the way. We have Meier, Hertl, and Kevin Labanc. This was probably the line with most of the Sharks' chances. The third line did have a couple of those breakaways in the first period, but most of the chances were concentrated on this line. We saw Hertl make some nice plays. Actually, there was one in the third period where he kind of not completely end to end, but carries this puck in solo and manages to get himself a good chance. We saw Meier get completely denied by Samsonov after a beautiful move that was reminiscent of one of the goals that he scored in that 5-goal game against the Kings last year. And so generally there were some very good chances here, but there just wasn't any of that finish. They couldn't beat Ilya Samsonov in nets for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and as such, there's just the one goal coming from this second line. Couture, Barabanov, and Nieto, they didn't necessarily have the most chances in the game, but they did have a couple of very good ones. Obviously, this Matt Nieto goal was quite nice, and then later on in the third period, they had a pretty much identical scoring chance. I believe it was Couture feeding Barabanov that time, but Samsonov was more ready for that one than he was for the first one. I do want to talk a bit about Matt Nieto now, who gets his 6th goal of the season. That puts him on pace pace to be about a 20-ish goal scorer at this point, slightly below that, certainly probably about 19-ish. But if he manages to stay on the second line and that ends up happening, that would be a massive surprise. I mean, I'm someone who didn't think Matt Nieto should ever be in a top 6 position, and I'm still kind of in that same thought process. But the fact that this actually, since the Sharks are sort of settled for this, because for whatever reason they don't want to call anyone up from the minors, so the fact that the Sharks settled for this and it has worked out well enough that you could feel it serviceable for at least now, it's been like a dozen games or something, is extremely impressive. So full credit does need to go with Matt Nieto, who has been doing a decent job keeping up with the two more skilled line mates with him. When it comes to the third line, like I mentioned earlier a couple of times, there were those breakaways, but besides those opportunities where we had classic Noah Gregor being unable to actually finish on those great attempts, the third line kind of found themselves in the defensive zone a lot, and past that first period, there weren't as many of those great openings. It seems as though Toronto kind of nailed that one down in the first intermission, and so this third line that had that one kind of niche in that first period never managed to find it again, and as such ended up being a bit of a weak line for the San Jose Sharks. The credit does have to go to them somewhat, as they are decently big parts, at least Cunnin and Bonino. They are decently big parts of the Sharks' very successful penalty kill thus far this season, and they once again managed to kill off, I believe, 3 different Toronto Maple Leafs power plays, even though they came very close to actually being able to score on them. But at terms of even strength, the third line wasn't anything impressive. When it comes to the fourth line, we saw Svechnikov sub back in for Jeff Viel, so, kind of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic when it comes to this fourth line, because obviously whether it's Svechnikov or Viel, there isn't necessarily going to be a real solution to this problem until Nico Sturm returns to the lineup. But I will say this line was slightly better than they have been as of late, though that is not saying much. This fourth line was still not good in the sort of relative fourth line sense, but at the very least they weren't completely disastrous. I thought Lorentz looked okay, and Svechnikov did look better than how he did prior to him being a healthy scratch in the last game against the Montreal Canadiens. So is there some notable improvement here? Not really. It was still rather invisible. I still didn't even notice Lindblom actually playing this game, but it was a slight microscopic improvement. On the defensive side of things, we did see a bit more offensive capability from Erik Karlsson. I talked about how in the Montreal game yesterday, he was a bit muted in terms of his play. I felt as though he was definitely better here tonight. Had a post hit, which he leads the league in terms of defensemen with most posts hit. If that's actually a very good stat to lead in, it's maybe a bit unlucky. But anyhow, he also set up a couple of decent looks, a great one in the third period, I must mention, and his partner Megna also doing a very solid job. But obviously the pairing that we need to talk about here tonight would be this Vlasic Benning one. I was singing their praises yesterday for their strong defensive play against the Montreal Canadiens, but of course, like I mentioned earlier, it's one thing to shut down players like Suzuki and Caulfield, who are very, very good in their own right, certainly, but it's another thing to shut down Matthews and Marner, who are bona fide superstars in the NHL, and they did an okay enough job, but we also saw multiple shifts where they were kind of victimized. And to speak specifically about Matt Benning, his game here tonight is one of the reasons why it was so easy to dislike him early on in this season, because while he may play some very solid defense, there are multiple plays where these massive mistakes just stick out like a sore thumb. And unlike Erik Karlsson, who has a tendency of sometimes making these types of massive mistakes, Benning doesn't really have any elite offensive game to fall back on to say, well, at least he does that like Karlsson has. Benning has pretty much nothing of that nature. And so to play soundly defensively and then have these couple of mistakes in a particular game doesn't make it so that you actually played particularly well ever. You need to be able to play that full 60 minutes of sound defensive hockey. But let's take a look at his two plays here tonight. The first one comes on the Matthews goal. This was one where he just kind of checks out of the play way too fast. This pass comes in front, and it seems as though Benning believes this puck is going to go in. So when the shot is made and Aaron Dell makes the great save, Benning is kind of unplugged his controller, so to speak, and it takes him a moment to actually get back into the game, and it's not fast enough to pick up Matthews, who is then able to tip a puck into the net. There were other players at fault, certainly, for this particular goal, but Benning definitely does stick out. And then on the second one, Benning is absolutely sticking out, while Hertl is, of course, the one responsible for this terrible giveaway in the neutral zone that allows the Leafs to quickly re-enter. Benning is supposed to be covering Engvall, and what is the saddest part of this is that he is covering Engvall. It's not as though he didn't pick him up in time or he doesn't have him quickly enough. He does have him, and yet he's unable to stop him from taking this shot. And so Aaron Dell makes the save, gives up the big rebound, obviously, but Benning needs to be able to either clear this puck away or prevent Engvall from getting a shot off, or even just prevent him from getting a clean shot off. But he doesn't do any of these things, and as such, it ends up in the back of the Sharks net, and that ends up being the game winner, and the Sharks lose. So Benning, he played rather well, shutting down at times Marner and Matthews, not allowing them to get too many great opportunities, but the two mistakes obviously stick out and make it so that he did not have a very good game. And finally, on the third pairing, I do want to mention Cicek. He picks up another assist here tonight, if I am not mistaken. He is slowly but surely picking up a few points here or there, not as though I am expecting Cicek to be some sort of offensive powerhouse. Quite the opposite. I was expecting him to be like a maybe 10-point guy if he played for like the rest of this season. But it shows that he has been sort of adapting to the David Quinn defensive system, which does involve the defenseman jumping up a bit into the play. Not to say that Cicek is orchestrating any offensive plays for himself, but he has been doing a decent job dishing the puck out, and he's picking up some, secondary assists here or there, which is nice to see. And then finally onto the goaltender Aaron Dell here. When Dell was signed this past offseason, it was quite obvious that he would end up being the Sharks' third goaltender, just as that veteran presence compared to players like Mann and Makanyemi, who are definitely a lot more inexperienced. They have no NHL experience compared to Dell, who, of course, the Sharks organization, even if it has changed a lot, is somewhat familiar with, considering he's a former Sharks goaltender. And with the injury to James Reimer and the fact that the Sharks are playing a back-to-back and then played yesterday, Dell gets the start here tonight, and honestly, I was expecting pretty disastrous results coming up against a very strong Toronto Maple Leafs team, and yet the Sharks, they did do him some decent favors in front, but there were multiple great chances for the Leafs that Dell had to make the save on, and he managed to do so. And so while the Sharks will end up losing this game, Dell will end up losing this game. It was actually a very impressive outing, in my opinion, for Aaron Dell. Kept the Sharks alive in this game from the Sharks just being unable to convert on their own chances. And so, like I said, it ends up being a loss, but he can definitely be proud of that performance, and the Sharks could maybe be a bit more willing to potentially part with a player like James Reimer as we move up to this trade deadline, because Aaron Dell seems to be a serviceable enough backup, considering they kind of tossed him to the Wolves here tonight, and he did quite well. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday, where they will take on the Ottawa Senators, so the second team here in the province of Ontario, and it should be a lot easier of a matchup for the San Jose Sharks. Their first matchup against the Senators was only about a week or two ago, and they kind of destroyed them with a score of 5-1, so we'll see how the rematch ends up. Class dismissed.